What's up, everybody? This is Albert, pronouns he, him, his, and we are back with another video for my project, Raising Souls. So for this video, we are going to be discussing Derecka Purnell's Becoming Abolitionists, Police Protests in the Pursuits of Freedom. So for those who don't know who Derecka Purnell is, she is a human rights lawyer, a journalist, a writer, and I think that's mainly what she does. She does a lot of advocacy work. She's involved in activism and all that stuff. So she's very prominent in like the Black Lives Matter discourse, but when it pertains to defunding, divesting, and decarceration efforts for the prison industrial complex. So this is like a good book for those that are interested in learning more about abolitionism. So I would say this is like in the realms of like Angela Davis's Our Prisons Obsolete, Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, and Mariame Kaba's We Do This Till We Free Us. So I would say like the difference between this and Mariame Kaba is that Mariame Kaba has been doing abolition work her entire life. Like ever since she was a baby, she was pretty much raised into advocating against the prison industrial complex. But Derek Purnell has the perspective of someone that's has not been raised in abolition circles. Like she talked about like reform efforts and police brutality as pertains to just police brutality, but not like the institution of policing, the history of policing, and the global and the analysis of policing as a byproduct of colonialism. So that's what is I find very unique when it comes to this book, and it's a contemporary book, and she's not a academic, so it's a very digestible language that she writes here. So let's get into it. So I would like to start off with the introduction, which is titled How I Became a Prison Abolitionist, in which she talked about a gas explosion that happened in her community. So she lived in, I think she lived in St. Louis, which is not far away from Ferguson, Missouri, which we all know is where Michael Brown got murdered. And that's how she got radicalized in her politics. But ever since then, there was a gas explosion in her community, and there was a lack of help from the government from that, and it's like the infrastructure that the community was handling could have prevented a gas explosion if there was actually conditions in place to improve things from a gas explosion happening. But unfortunate, we didn't get that. So that's how Derecka got into a deeper analysis. Like she knows that things don't have to be they were when she encountered this gas explosion, and she was also witnessing. She also witnessed the shooting by a security guard, so she know that and she noticed that authority doesn't always have the best judgment. So that's how she became into challenging the status quo, as I would say, to that aspect. And then she talked about how she went to fighting from reform efforts to abolition efforts. So it was on page 6 to 7. Yes, she says here from a professor, Naomi Murakawa, a Princeton professor, said, at best, these reforms discourage certain techniques of killing, but they don't condemn the fact of police killing. Ban the chokehold, but allow murder with guns and tasers in police vans. The analogy here is to death penalty reformers who improve the noose with an electric chair, and then improve the electric chair with chemical cocktails. But the technique of murder doesn't comfort the dead. It comforts the executioners and all their supportive onlookers. Like so much reform to address racism, all this legal fine print is meant to salve the conscience of moderates who want salvation on a cheap, without any real change to material life and death realities for Black people. Still, many Americans believe that most police officers do the right thing. Perhaps there are a few bad apples, but even the very best apples surveil, arrest, and detain millions of people every year whose primary crime is that they are immigrants, Black, poor, and unhoused. Cops escalate violence disproportionately against people with disabilities and in mental health crises, even the ones who call 911 for help. The police officers are doing the right thing, maintain the systems of inequality and ableism in Black communities. The right thing is wrong. Policing cannot even fix what many of us fear most. People often ask me, what will we do with murderers and rapists? Which ones? The police kill about 1,000 people every year and potentially assault, threaten, and harm hundreds of thousands more. After excessive force, sexual misconduct is the second most common complaint against cops. Many people are afraid to call the police when they suffer these harms because they fear that the police will hurt them too. Thousands of rape survivors refuse to call the police, worried about not being believed or about being reassaulted or concerned with their rape kit was sit unexamined for years. In 3 major cities, less than 4% of the calls to police are for violent crimes. Currently, the arrest rate for homicides has declined from 80% to 60%, and cops frequently arrest and force confessions out of the wrong people. And here on this part, she says, slavery abolition required resistance, risk, and experimentation. Black people plotted, rebelled, ran away, built an underground railroad, marooned. Abolitionists wrote and orated against a peculiar institution. Allies funded campaigns, passed legislation, and changed the Constitution. Of course, people at the time felt a range of anxieties about abolition. Slave owners worried about their plantations and the profits that the labor camps wrought. White overseers feared joblessness. Both feared the loss of superiority. Some Black people had reservations about how they sustained themselves without a steady yet violent income from their owners. Police abolition triggers similar anxieties today, moral, economic, and otherwise. But if abolitionists had waited to convince every single person that freedom was worth the pursuit, Black people might still be on plantations. Slavery's violence and repression was riskier than Black people's plans, imagination, and will to be free. So they held the uncertainty in their bellies and started planning. Some started running. Rather than waiting for comforting answers to every potential harm ahead of us, let's plan, run, dream, experiment, and continue to organize, imagine, and transform the society toward freedom and justice without police and violence. So the rhetoric here definitely reminds me of Miriam Kaba's We Do This Till We Freed Us, and making the parallels between the current policing system and the institution of slavery, and how all of those are pretty much have the same goals, but they just look different and operate in they operate in similar ways, but they have a different look, different laws, different evolved ways of maintaining social control and maintaining the inequality, whether it's class, race, ableness, sexuality, gender, and all of the above. So now we're going to start off with chapter 1, which is titled What Justice. So I think I'm just going to break down all of these because this is a very heavy book, but it's very digestible language, but it's a very heavy book. It has almost 300 pages. So I'm definitely going to try to break down every chapter as the best of my ability. So we're going to start off with chapter 1, which is titled What is Justice? So it makes you think about, what is justice? Justice looks different for people. Not of all of us think like a conviction of a cop that killed someone is justice. Some people think just a community gathered together is justice. So we have these misconstrued ways of what actually qualifies as justice, but really justice involves the person that has been impacted. So a dead person can't have justice. So that's kind of made me really think about that. Okay, that makes sense, because it's like it's not to it's not healing for them. They're the ones that have died. They can't stick up for themselves. They can't really be represented well without themselves in the scene. So that's an interesting way to look at it. And then Purnell talked about how propaganda and the carceral system is so deep within the school systems. So think about school resource officers, metal detectors, hall sweeps, school cops, AFJROTC, and like the community programs between the community and young people. So there's something called the Youth Crime Watch of America and the Kingdom House, and they're all funded by law enforcement. There's all as much money as the police get. That those are programs that probably don't need to have police necessarily in them involved. But it would have been nice if it's just something that the community can control and not so more the state and the police. So that's when she talks about divesting and reinvesting in the community. And then she talked about her experiences facing violence and how the only people that protected her were people that were her friends, her family. She had an ex-boyfriend that stalked her. There are people she didn't really. The only time she only called the police once, and she had a bad experience with them. And even when she tried to call for to get a key that she accidentally locked herself out of in the car, that she even called 911 and said, can she not get the police to come here? Can she get a locksmith? Next thing you know, the cops still came. So it just shows you that you can be fine and content with things and not having to rely on the police. So she's wondering, how could she have the experience that she went through, have the be experience for the collective? So just checking up on each other, get into community protection, and yes. And then she talked about how important it is to understand capitalist exploitation here on chapter 34. Page 34. She said here, the explanation about who controls the police provided further context to the anti-immigration rally that I counter-protested the year before. The white kids who owned the tree in the Gina, and she talked about the Gina 6 trials, and the armed white militias who threatened and shot Black Hurricane Katrina survivors. Police targeted people because of their race, and certainly more. Race and ethnicity are inseparable from who hoards wealth and who fills out endless job applications for low-wage jobs, who owns apartment complexes and who rents rooms, who celebrates Independence Day and who is deported, and who languishes in prisons and who is free. Cops are the armed force that maintain these divisions. So it's pretty much shows you how we go into the difference between unconstitutional policing and constitutional policing, and shows that even when you follow the book and all the rules, you're still committing something that is to the interest of the corporations and the government and the elites. And that is it for chapter 1. And before she ended it, she was talking about how she got experience in organizing and justice rallies. She talked about her skepticism and hesitancy on Obama. Then she talked about Trayvon Martin, how she got the news about George Zimmerman's acquittal, and the Jordan Davis case, who is I think it was the black boy that got murdered for playing rap music too loud in Florida too. And so all of those things were happening. And that is the end for chapter 1. So chapter 2 is excuse me, is titled First We Were Free. So she talked about her family history, her grandfather's experience in the Jim Crow South, and then she talked about her experience organizing in the aftermath of Michael Brown's murder. And she was in the middle of trying to go to law school, and then she had an inner conflict about the law is just an unjust, period. So why should I go to law school? So she was having an inner battle with herself when she was trying to go to Harvard law school, and she ended up going to Harvard Law School and trying to finesse the game of the system, and her intentions with it. And then she went into the history of resistance against anti-Black racism on page 56. She said here, because Africans were free, they had to be trapped. Because Africans ran away, new cuffs had to be designed to hold their hands, shackle their necks, and link their ankles. Because Africans fought with weapons, Europeans had to use more powerful ones. Because Africans hid, Europeans had to develop bands to search for them. And because Africans constantly planned rebellions and revolts on the way over, Europeans at the top of the ship had to develop systems of patrol, surveillance, caging, and even African informants to hold the Black bodies at the bottom of the ships. So she talked about, like, even just because oppression has been happening, there have been people that were oppressed that have been fighting against oppression, even while they even though they probably didn't win at the end of the day. So, and she also said here, nevertheless, Black people continue to rebel in the quest for their freedom. White people feared rebellion and the threat of it so much because it destroyed their lives, property, and money. Policing in South Carolina consequently required a united front to stop Black people. In the late 1600s, officials there legally mandated that every white man between 16 and 60 to join the militia, and legally empowered every white person to arrest, punish, and return runaways. White civilians were not only encouraged to monitor and control Black people, but were required to do so, sometimes under the threat of being fined. The government criminalized people for not policing. As slavery spread, resistance spread, and these policing duties transcended geography and ultimately time. Policing was not just found in the formal duties of the patrol and the militias, but also in the lives of everyday white people to control subordinate populations whose freedom threatened their lives, property, and ego. I was learning that white people have been historically conditioned to control the behaviors of others, from the white woman who grabbed me at the Chris Kobach rally in Kansas to George Zimmerman when he stalked Trayvon Martin and Michael Dunn when he killed Jordan Davis, from the white people who held their guns to Black Hurricane Katrina survivors to the armed militias who patrol the Arizona border. So it's like, it's so weird, like you coercing people to kill each other. So it's like people that were trying to sign up for the Vietnam War, and if they didn't they didn't fight the war in Vietnam, like they got in prison, they got fined, and all that stuff, like Muhammad Ali. And this is what happened during slavery. Like, white people were forced to become slavers too. So it's you have to realize who actually willing. You have to be really committed to freedom, and whether you're, no matter how you're living in life. And then Purnell said here on page 60, in his classic text Black Reconstruction in America, W.E.B. Du Bois describes the labor of bondspeople and the exploitation of the white worker as an economic rivalry that the latter overcame through jobs as police. It would have seemed natural that the poor white would have refused to police the slaves, but two considerations led him in the opposite direction. First of all, it gave him work and some authority as an overseer, Black slave driver, and member of the patrol system. But above and beyond this, it fed his vanity because it associated him with the masters. Gradually, the whole white South became an armed commission camp to keep Negroes in slavery and to kill the Black rebel. And Alexander's mentioned, I think it was the Bacon Rebellion, in which it was this period where white working class and working class Black folks, they were about to be united front, but then the government and the elites tried to appeal to the working whites. So it made me think about the Southern strategy, rural class rural white people to that they're trying to steal your jobs, they're trying to take your wages, they are trying to take your place and make you feel bad about your whiteness. So they're feeding all this propaganda to southern white folks, and then that's how they got into the slave patrol system. So it's making these class divisions that you don't really realize, like it's really creating these tensions between the working class white people that probably are nowadays conservative Republican right wingers, and the black working class. And then she also said here, the difference between what's legal and illegal is not the behavior of the lawbreaker. It is the interest of the powerful people who create the law and have control of the police to enforce it. Under slavery, lawmakers sent a message and patrols enforced it. If you run or try, you will be returned, punished, put to work, or put to death. Thus, flight from the plantations was forbidden and illegal, and yet many black people ran away, stole from their slavers, fought off catchers, created fraudulent identities, and for the ones who made it to the free territories, lived as fugitives. Modern police, as it turned out, were not simply deviating from their jobs. They had centuries of influence that built habits of surveilling, monitoring, and capturing people, especially black and indigenous peoples, who disproportionately suffer police arrests, killings, and imprisonment now. So then it went into the optics that happened during the Civil War. That led to the optics of the Civil War when it came to who's fighting in the Confederacy and who's fighting in the Union. And then we got into child support laws and how even with those laws, there's some anti-blackness that is into those because it creates divisions in black families, clearly. But that also led to the murder of Walter Scott, who was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who was shot and killed, or no, I think it was Charleston, North Carolina, where Walter Scott was killed by Michael Slager. And that is it for chapter 2. So chapter 3 is titled Resistance and Reform. So that went into how Purnell started to become a fully committed abolitionist. So the first thing she talked about were like the empty promise reforms. So the ban of chokeholds, the body cameras, and indictments, and how there's really no change, no significant change that came out of those, and how reforms are just not enough. And yeah, she said here, akin to the capitalists who were committed to developing destructive tools to protect profits from slavery, body and dashboard cameras were a gift to technology companies profiting from the police killings of black people. And she talked about like Facebook and social media, how that generates clicks and all that stuff, and that's putting more money into the white corporate technology companies. And she also said here, even when activists and lawyers know that a conviction is unlikely, these facts cannot comfort a grieving family who wants anything to atone for their involuntary sacrifice. I understand and completely sympathize with people who still want killer cops to go to prison. In a society where the options for killer cops seem like prison or nothing, prison and punishment feel like justice. But punishment is not justice, and I do not believe that we can secure justice for anyone killed by the police. Justice is a process where people decide and create the conditions that help us thrive, and it involves the people who are most impacted by those conditions. The dead cannot participate in this process. We can demand lots of outcomes for their deaths, punishment, revenge, relief, but not justice. When convictions do lead to cops entering prison, some people are excited because prisons are where we send poor, black, and disabled people to suffer, the disposable. This justice is built upon maintaining this suffering for everyone else. So that really makes you think about it, because it's like we're putting them in the same place where we always put the people that are the disposable, the people that don't matter. And she also said here, in response, cops work with lawmakers to pass state laws that criminalize protests, such as limiting how people can demonstrate and increasing the numbers of crimes that protesters can be charged with. One lawmaker exposed a bill that will bar activists from receiving student grants and loans if they are convicted of a crime related to a protest, rally, march, or other demonstration. The same bill also bars other forms of state aid like food stamps and unemployment benefits. These measures attack students who are primary drivers of resistance movements and also poor people who are forced to rely on assistance in the first place. Lawyers, activists, and anyone who cares about civil liberties must vehemently protect the right to protest. And yeah, like it's pretty much erasing the history of student activism and how a lot of the programs and community initiatives came from people that were students, people that were in college. And to think that something like that is going to be criminalized is it's wild. And then she talked about she referenced Frederick Douglass's autobiography, and she mentioned a part where Douglass fought off his slave owner, and she said here, Douglass's resistance was illegal and even violent, but that's what it took for his survival and freedom. While beatings onto plantation were normal, routine, and regular, his writing demonstrated that slavery's violence was possible because of the fact of the plantation, not because black people were misbehaving. To stop the legal whippings, beatings, kidnapping, sale, and sexual violence committed by slave owners, slavery, the root cause, had to be abolished. Douglass explained it was slavery, not its mere incidents, that I hated. Slavery as a system was wrong, not just the harms that it created. He further challenged my ideas on police reform. Was the mere incidents of policing that I hated, the shootings, chokeholds, and arrests, or was it the institution and what it was designed to do? And she mentioned Alex Vital, a sociologist, who said a kinder, gentler, and more diverse war on the poor is still a war on the poor. So that makes you really think about it. There's even a global history of policing and how it's a byproduct of the colonialism. And if you want to even go there, yes, there were police in predominantly white countries, but they were protecting the royalty, the hierarchies. So that makes you that pretty much can tie very well into the police was protecting property and the capitalists and industrialists. And then she was talking about how she was protesting in Ferguson, and she was talking about the violence that she went through. There was a lot of tear gas, there were some assaults, there were tanks. As everyone who remembers Ferguson, it was literally a war going on over there. And then she went into the global history of policing on page 88. She said here, which I would think after you read this, it will make you really think. Adopting police reforms from other countries could be a start to save some lives, but cities could run the risk of adopting other problems. Instead of slavery, police across the globe were often birthed under other oppressive systems, like monarchies and colonialism. In the Northeast United States, the modern police force drew heavily from Britain's patrols, which were developed through the colonization of Ireland. Britain colonized India and established a police force in the 1860s, modeling it after the Commonwealth's colonial paramilitary police during its occupation of the Irish. Canada's and Australia's police departments were also rooted in British colonization and the forced genocide of indigenous peoples. Indonesia's police force developed under Dutch occupation. The Japanese maintained the Dutchess model when it took over Indonesia and established their colonizing police force. Mexico's oldest police forces were derivative of Spain's Guardia Civil. The police force in Rio de Janeiro and Brazil was modernized under Portuguese colonization in the early 1800s to prevent slave uprisings after modern-day Haiti. The first national police force in Nigeria was established in 1930 by the British colonial government to stifle dissent against colonial rule. Nigeria has maintained the basic structure of the police even after they gained independence in 1960. Policing is a settler colonial creation to control native populations and is exported abroad to teach other empires how to do the same. And I like that she brought up Nigeria because there's currently a moving happening called the NSARS movement, in which there was a special police force that has been very brutal, especially to the Black LGBTQ plus community in Nigeria. So it's a very intriguing history lesson in policing, and I think Miriam Kaba mentioned it and too, and we do this till we free us. And then she went into the movements that are happening in universities and decolonization movement. She's talked about roads must fall and the Soweto uprising in South Africa. A lot of it deals with like divestment from some apartheid, more deals with prison labor and how universities make their name off of a lot of former slave owners. So it goes into, she went into like those histories. And I think that might be it for, oh no, right here. She says here, at the end of the chapter 3, I had to let go of what so many Black people believe we needed to be free and safe in the United States. The idea that the police, private property, and capitalism were the way to protection and mobility. I didn't want what white people had to be the basis of our liberation. I wanted to be free. White people weren't even free. She went there. They were bound to rotten fruits of slavery, colonialism, and genocide, and found culture and identity in flags, borders, and badges. The police reforms that promised us equal protection under the law were equally protecting the violence that I wanted to eradicate. So she went into like, it's deeper than just equal protection under the law. And that was chapter 3. So now for chapter 4, which is titled Love and Abolition. She mentioned the advocacy work of this person named Zelda in South Africa, and she did a lot of work with the anti-apartheid movements there. And she said, and she was talking to Zelda, and Zelda said here, I held an earlier view of police to be a resource for people when they need protection or support, but not for police to remove the agency of people to engage in ways that secure their safety. But police act as if they are the only resource, and their obligation is to the state, property, and people with property. When the state and the police are disconnected, then the police are disconnected from the people and view them as the enemy. The state is not enabling the basic needs, visions, and values contained in the Freedom Charter. People protest the corruption, and the police protect the state. Turn the guns on the people. Police will say bad apples and we need trials for these extrajudicial killings. However, it is a pattern and not isolation, which led me to think of it as extrajudicial killings, but as judicial. You put them in uniform, give them weapons of war, and send them to march. Cops don't look to protect our safety at protests. No support, no emergency preparedness. They are out to do battle in a war zone and act as the least provocation. This is a war of inequality, but we need a reimagination of a resource for people's safety. Separate from police as the foundation for that, but embedded it in the people. Conflict resolution, peace committees, street committees, block committees, democratic expressions of people power projects. So that's some suggestions that she put out there as alternatives to policing, which don't sound bad to at least try. And then Purnell was talking about how going into abolition work encouraged her to expand political education. She worked a lot with the Harvard Law School, the black students in Harvard Law School. They did a lot of organizing for socialism and internationalism in the school. And let me see, did she mention anything there? No, just yeah, she literally went into like what is our curriculum? What are our politics? We need to be on the same page when it comes to building a revolution. And then I think she was talking to Robin D.G. Kelly, who I want to get into his work. He is also a notable liberation scholar. And over time, Robin D.G. Kelly explained the university may soften and concede to our cultural demands, but rarely on the transformational ones. This is why buildings will be renamed and all black or people of color safe spaces will be created out of a sliver of university real estate, but proposals to eliminate tuition and forgive student debt for the descendants of the dispossessed and the enslaved will be derided as absurd. The law school proved him right. They eventually met our original demands to make administrative diversity hires to remove Isaac Royale's family shield and to set up a memorial for those enslaved by the Royale family. A rock near the library stairs, students are still campaigning to divest Harvard's multi-billion endowment from fossil fuels and private prisons, which if you go into the money of Harvard, yeah, they're not going to do that. So that goes into the violence of the university and academia. And Purnell said when she was talking to the other her fellow students, she said, "We were confronted with a choice: keep organizing to make our school or country live up to the ideals that it claimed, or build beloved communities to transform ourselves as we organize in pursuit of liberation. We fused the two to keep organizing and implemented our own demands to create the world we wanted." Which, if you are a student in the university, this is a good mentality to have. And she said, "I felt responsible for organizing and molding abolitionist futures with other people, which was much broader than the elimination of any one particular system practice. It was a politic, a paradigm to organize, navigate, and recreate the world. Love offered me more agency than resistance or trauma could, and my growing desire to learn and take risks with others became a source of inspiration for my freedom, for our freedom. Abolition as the founding of a new society disrupts any allegiance to any republic for which it stands and begs us to ask, what should we be standing for? The U.S. once stood for genocide, slavery, disenfranchisement, and currently stands for militarism, policing, and the concentration of wealth for a few. Abolition destroys the stubborn allegiances, keep society so violent, and births new possibilities to live under a dynamic democracy led by the people." And that's how she pretty much reaffirmed her abolitionist curiosity in politics. And and she also talked about the Maroon Movements. For those who don't know about the Maroon Movements, it were formerly enslaved black people that ran away from slavery, and then they made communities, safe spaces, and sanctuaries for people that were currently enslaved. So I guess you can look at it as like the sanctuary cities that are in undocumented cities, and I guess the tradition of that led into the sanctuary cities for those who are undocumented. So it's my first time learning about the Maroon movement, and let me see. Yeah, she said Maroon rebellions and raids toward freedom prompted European colonizers to request more resources for law enforcement and patrols to preempt and stop raids from Maroons. So they are like the enemies. So it's like, it made me think about the Black Panther Party and how they were treated and did things. And then she went into the legal system, which I think Michelle Alexander delved more into the nuance, the complexities of the legal system, the quote unquote legal system, and the criminal and justice system. When she talked about judges and how judges are selected, how jury is selected, the power of prosecutors, the treatment of clients, probation, parole, and corrections, and how a lot of police violence is committed because of discretion, and what are the factors that contributed to that discretion and the fabrication that a lot of police do when they committed terror and make them be the victim. And then she went into, I appreciated that she went into how she critiqued abolitionism. She talked about the idea of an abolition democracy on page 119. yeah, she talked about yeah, she talked about what Du Bois criticism of an abolition democracy, in which and she was critiquing the white abolitionist movement. So people like Susan B. Anthony and others that are fine with getting rid of slavery, but they still want the exploitative labor market, or the industrialized or the industrial movement that exploits workers. And I'm literally thinking about Susan B. Anthony. Like, she's all right with the abolition of slavery, but she don't think black women should have the right to vote. So it's like, abolition should go deeper than that and actually have people have a say in their livelihood. So give them the agency and an autonomy for them to choose what they want to do with their lives. And she said here, she was quoting theoretician George Novak, who said, on the Sea Islands of Georgia and South Carolina, for example, 40,000 freedmen each took 40 acres of land and worked it on their own account. When the former owners came later to claim their plantations, these new proprietors armed themselves and resisted. Similar expropriations and clashes took place elsewhere, not only between planters and Negroes, but between land-hungry freedmen and federal troops. Land seizures would have taken place on a far larger scale if the freedmen did not have faith in Republican promises and expected that land would be handed to them as it was to the homesteaders in the West. So that's something that I just learned, and it made me think about the Haitian Revolution, when Haiti took the people that were enslaved, that were got through the Middle Passage and were enslaved in Haiti, how they fought back against the French. And it's like, you literally have to, the only person that's stopping freedom is literally yourself. So it's it really makes you challenge yourself into, like, what should you do and for freedom. And she also says and Purnell also says here, she was talking to her friend Rachel. She said, Rachel helped me distill police abolition into an organizing praxis. Make policing obsolete by reducing the police, reducing the reasons why people need police, reducing the reasons why people think they need police, and building a society where we have just relationships to each other, to our labor, to our communities, and to our planet. And that is it. Yep, that is it for chapter 4. So I'm probably gonna, I'll see how I can do. I think I can actually do all the chapters. So let me see. I'm gonna do chapter 5, which is titled Justice for the Living. And she was talking about people that are affected by community violence and how she incorporated abolitionist politics into her organizing to fight to address the violence there. And on page 139, that's what she. No, I missed something. Yeah, when there is a homicide, we can presumably call the police to report it. When the police kill or a city is responsible for multiple deaths, like Greenfell Tower, there is no number to call to make an arrest. So she's talking about how it's easy for violence that happens in the community, like say a homicide just happened, you easily call the police, but something like insecure housing, like a building has collapsed and so many people died, and there's so many ways that could have prevented the building to collapse, that is responsible for the landlords. The landlords don't get prosecuted because they are the ones that are doing what they're supposed to do, and that's exploit the tenants. And when she went into addressing community violence, she said here, I asked a group of organizers if we can broaden the scope of Inez's question, what about the murderers? Does not have a singular solution because murderers do not have a singular cause. Why do people kill people could be more useful for our brainstorming, and I asked if we could start there. They agreed. In small groups, they wrote lists of reasons why people kill people on giant post-it notes. Gang violence, mental health, racism, rage and jealousy, homophobia, transphobia, Retaliation, the police, killing someone before they kill you, access to guns, stress, passion, robberies and carjackings gone bad, self defense, accidents, bystanders, cheating, protection. We share consensus that we would not respond to each of these scenarios the same way, not even the murderers. By desegregating homicides into digestible social problems, we could brainstorm various solutions to stop, prevent, and respond to harm now as we were eradicating the root causes and creating better relationships. And she says here also, economic deprivation and neighborhood segregation do not happen by accident, and poverty does not grow from the ground. Whenever Black people in this country have attempted to build self sustaining communities, they have faced white violence and state interference that threatened their wealth. Fannie Lou Hamer writes in her autobiography that just as her family had accumulated enough livestock to cease sharecropping, a white man poisoned all of their mules and cows to stop them from getting ahead. Racists have torched Black-owned businesses and neighborhoods as a racial and economic intimidation tactic. Banks have denied Black people home, auto, and business loans on the basis of race. The federal government failed to deliver the educational, economic, and housing benefits it promised to more than 1 million Black veterans through the GI Bill. Black communities have been decimated by highway construction, redlining, and gentrification. Studies show that cities with high rates of inequality and economic segregation leads to high levels of aggravated assaults, robberies, burglaries, and motor vehicle thefts. And as Butler details homicides, police arrive to manage the fallout. And that's what police do. Police do not decrease violent crime. They respond to crimes. So the crime already happened, and then police came. So it shows that what can we do to actually prevent crime to continue. So taking proactive approaches, which they were literally talking about, mental health, gangs, they were talking about homophobia, transphobia, jealousy, and all of that can literally be solved when there's like community remediation or some conflict resolution settings that can happen to prevent people from doing the things that they do. And it can also be alcoholism. Like it's literally things that we know we do them if we tackle on these issues, but we need the resources for them. And Purnell also states here, much like slave patrols grew in response to slave resistance, police tactics like infiltration and informants grew in response to radical Black activism. And this made me think about the war on drugs, and that was happening after the Black Power movement. And I didn't even know that there are even Black churches that belong to this thing called cop and clergy coalitions, which there are cops that were affiliated with some Black churches. And but she also listed some organizations that are actually trying to address these issues effectively and substantially. She said organizations like Live Free, Tyler Salute, and Cure Violence build relationships with residents who are most likely to kill or be killed by gun violence. Interrupters are trained to de-escalate volatile situations, relocate potential targets to safety, organize truces between rivalries, and care for the families of those slain. So, yeah, it made me think about like when it comes to like Black on Black crime on discourse, and there was many histories of FBI surveilling and the history of like snitching. So that's what I got to learn from this part. And then she was talking about she went into more about LGBTQ plus violence against LGBTQ plus people. So she went into the trans women that have been murdered. She talked about the story of Kiwi Herring, who I just learned about through this book, who was a Black trans woman that was murdered by a neighbor. And it's like when we talk about the way we talk about gender and stuff like that, it creates violent incidents like what happened to Kiwi Herring because of the transphobia that she faced. And then she talked more about the sex work industry and how the trans women that get violated there. And she also talked about what influences burglaries. People steal because they feel like they need something to feel safe. So it's like, what if we actually have a redistribution of wealth or something like that, and to stop wealth hoarding? And what influences mass shootings? And she talked about how a lot of the mass shootings that have been happening in the United States is because of some self-serving, narcissistic patriotism that the United States loves to propagate, individualism, and there's also ties to the military. So what about the murderers? Think about imperialism, the bombs that are being thrown into other countries by the United States military. So what about those murderers? So it's like, when you say what about murderers, what do we think about when we talk about those type of crimes? So I think that was it. She said, yeah, plainly put, when the federal government uses law enforcement and the military to control concentrated wealth, property, and natural resources, they condition everyday people to accept the violence, replicate it, and rebel against it. And I think that might be it for chapter 5. So I think I can address chapter 6 real quick. Chapter 6 is titled Sex, Love, and Violence, and it went into more about, so trigger warning, sexual violence mentioning, and stories about sexual violence. So she's talking about sexual violence and how the Me Too movement kind to it's butt heads with the abolition discourse. So it talks about, like, what about the rapists and stuff like that. So it's talking about Purnell was talking about how rape has been defined so differently now than 100 years ago. It used to be like it justified rape, like justified rape is a thing when you're married or something like that. So it goes into like the government and the police do not even really care about rape like that. Like, she literally said sexual misconduct is the second most common violent act from the police. First is killing, second is sexual misconduct. So she talked about how rape culture is in communities. She talked about fathers, husbands, sons, brothers, nephews, cousins, uncles, friends, pastors, bosses, strangers violated mothers, wives, daughters, sisters, nieces, aunts, girlfriends, cleaning ladies, babysitters, nuns, neighbors. So she's talking about, what about the rapists? What about the people that you're related to? So she also said, if pastors preached against sexual violence instead of against divorce, perhaps they would save more marriages. I really appreciated that she said something to that degree, because of, like, it's not really something that of course of a male dominated organization like the Black Church, sexual violence isn't addressed effectively as it should be. And then she went into the Violence Against Women Act, which does little to nothing when it comes to rape and sexual assault. And it was pretty much just more funding to police more than survivor-led coalitions and groups. So it's nothing when it comes to caring and centering the survivors' needs. It's just the government is saying, we're going to put this person in prison because they did what they did to you. And when it comes to proving rape, that's actually hard to do. What is really hard to prove that you've been sexually violated. And it's pretty much just goes into more into like how sexual violence will not end as long as the carceral state has been operating the way it does. And she also talked about, we don't even talk about the rape and sexual violence that's happening in prisons. And not inmate to inmate, inmate to security guards, inmates to the workers. It's just sexual violence does not involve the incarcerated, apparently. And then she went into sexual violence and capitalism. Let me see if I can find that. Yeah, she says capitalism fosters sexual violence by creating categories of people who cannot leave abusive relationships, classrooms, and jobs because they do not have resources to sustain themselves. Sexual violence aids capitalism by creating hostile relationships, schools, and workplaces that helps companies more easily pay low wages to people in vulnerable situations, like women, disabled people, undocumented immigrants, and transgender people, as I discussed in the last chapter. And then she talked about gender and how we gender children, the binaries, the heteronormativity, boy is blue, girl is pink, and all that jazz. Knowing that's just stuff that is socialized and really doesn't mean anything. We just agreed like that's just the way things are. And what if what if a girl happens to like blue? What does that say about her femininity? And what does a boy's who likes pink, what does that say about his masculinity? And that gives more violence to people that are queer. And yeah, she says here, going more into police sexual misconduct, she says, why do cops rape? Unlike Norm Stamper, I don't think there are simply too many rapists who just happen to become cops. I do believe that cops, like all of us, are conditioned by a society steeped in rape culture and gender-based violence. The badge and the baton give cops additional power and protection to act violently. A study found that in more than 70% of cases, officers wielded their authority over motorists, crime victims, informants, students, and young people in job shadowing programs. They especially take advantage of women, trans women, young people, sex workers, prisoners, and others who are class exploited because cops like Daniel Holtzclaw deem them less credible as accusers and witnesses. And then she talked about prison rape on page 187 to 188. Like if you went into my Angela Davis, Our Prisons Obsolete, and Charles Shakur's autobiography, there's something called internal searches. Go check those videos out to show you what those are about. Those are not things that are of consent, and those are violence against incarcerated women. And she talked about military sexual violence and how it continues to be a settler colonial project because it takes advantage of people that are oppressed, which in this case tend to be women, and how it functions as something that enables sexual violence and imperialism. So do with that may be about the military industrial complex and how useful it actually is. And then she talked about community-based solutions on page 197. She says, we need students to learn about stories of resistance more than they learn about oppression, to experiment with democracy more than watered down lessons on suffrage, and to fight patriarchy more than replicating it, which I approve. She wants a solution-focused agenda when it comes to abolition. And I think that is it for chapter 6. So I think I'm going to stop right here and make a part 2 to Becoming Abolitionists, which I thank you all for being with me on this part of Becoming Abolitionists. Follow my Instagram at Raisin Souls. And follow my personal Instagram at Intellectual Albert. It will be on the description box below. And check out the No Name Book Club meetup that I recently joined. I got to see Derecka Purnell, amazing, and Joanna Fernandez, who is close with Mumia Abu Jamal. She was in that Zoom call as well. She wanted to talk about abolition there. So go check it out.